Legend of the Phoenix, from Babel to the Austronesian expansion. World myth tells us that after the flood, instead of spreading over the earth as God commanded, they gathered together in one place. The historian Josephus records that they descended the mountain and went east to the plain of Shinar, where they multiplied and prospered. Josephus claimed the people built a tower in rebellion against God's directive to send out colonies. When God saw that they acted so madly, he caused a tumult among them by producing in them diverse languages, and causing that, through the multitude of those languages, they should not be able to understand one another. Before the confusion of languages that led to the dispersion, most ancient sources agree that the world used only one language. The North American Casca tribes hold that, before the flood, there was but one center, for all people lived together in one country and spoke one language. The idea of one world language was echoed in the myths of the Ticunas of the Brazilian Amazon, the East African Bantus, and the ancient Greeks. The Sibylline chronicles say they all spoke one language. Now, when the tower fell, and the tongues of men turned to all sorts of sounds, straightway all earth was filled with men, and kingdoms were divided. Austronesians are connected, not only by genetics and common culture, but by a wide range of spoken Austronesian languages. Myths regarding the origins of their family of languages would be of special interest to Filipinos, who have around 120 to 187 spoken languages in the Philippine Islands. Except for English, Spanish, Chavacano, and varieties of Chinese, all of the languages belong to the Malayo-Polynesian branch of the Austronesian language family. Polynesians remember the time their ancestors built a tower that made God angry, who then, in anger, chased the builders away, broke down the building, and changed their language so that they spoke diverse tongues. The Mikir tribes of northeastern India say, higher and higher rose the building, till at last the gods and demons feared lest these giants should become masters of heaven as they already were of earth. So they confounded their speech and scattered them to the four corners of the world. Hence arose all the various tongues of mankind. The Karens of Burma tell the tale of Padan Man, when the people determined to build a pagoda that should reach up to heaven. When the pagoda was halfway up to heaven, God came down and confounded the language of the people, so that they could not understand each other. Then the people scattered. Tribes in the Andaman Islands in the Bay of Bengal say that the languages were given by Puluga, God, after the deluge, and that his offspring became so numerous that their home could no longer accommodate them. At Puluga's bidding, they were furnished with all necessary weapons, implements, and fire, and then scattered in pairs all over the country. When this exodus occurred, Puluga provided each party with a distinct dialect. In the Philippine myth, lalaki, man, and babae, woman, agreed to get married and repopulate the world after the flood, following the approval of the birds, the fish, and the god of earthquakes. Babae gave birth to a large number of boys and girls who could no longer be supported in one house. So one day, lalaki pretended to be angry and drove his children away with a stick. Fearing for their lives, many ran out of the house, while some hid in the bedroom, the living room, and the kitchen. Those who left the house populated many different parts of the world. Those in the bedroom became their Datu, lords and chiefs. Those in the living room were the Timawa, freemen and nobles. And those who hid behind walls became alipin, slaves. Those who hid in the chimney and under pots became the Negros, who live in the mountains of the Philippines. The Philippine myth tells us that the languages spoken around the world originated from the dispersion of that one family of flood survivors. The Spaniards, with their foreign dialect, were told by the Filipinos that they were considered offspring of the children who had run out of the house. Establishment of social classes was an important part of the myth. After the dispersion, Austronesian language families may have organized themselves by selecting a primary founding father and tribal chiefs, the free nobles with special skills who should assist them in their work, and the slaves who should supply the manual labor to establish their civilization. When the people scattered, the Karens of Burma say Timawa, the father of the Gaiko tribe, came west with 8 chiefs and settled in the valley of the Sitang. Throughout the Philippine Cordillera region, Lumawig was frequently encountered, often as a son of Kabuniaan, who descended to earth. It is Lumawig who came from heaven, who taught the mountain tribes how to plant rice, rituals, and customs pleasing to the gods, and he brought many beneficial gifts. Historian W. H. Scott suggested that Lumawig had been a real person, mythologized over time. Archaeologists agree that the Austronesian Liangzhou culture had a highly stratified society from the earliest times. Elite graves included high-value jade, silk, ivory, and lacquer items, while poorer individuals were buried with pottery. Evidence of funerary ritual and standardized motifs, urban planning, and the ability to mobilize the population in large-scale building projects indicate an advanced civilization with distinct social classes. Austronesian Liangzhou had chosen the bird as their primary totem, shown in pottery and important ritual jade artifacts. After the flood, the world was divided and repopulated by the 3 sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. The 3 sons of Manu, born before the deluge, were Shaharma, Karma, and Japeti in Vedic texts. 3 sons of Uranus, according to the Sibylline chronicles, were Kronos, Titan, and Iapetus. Descendants of Japheth were said to have received the northern part of the world, above the Mediterranean Sea, from Europe to China, and his son Tarshish were to establish families in the coastlands of the nations, were separated into their lands, everyone according to his language, according to their families, into their nations. They were not a nation with coastlands, but they would live in the coastlands of the nations, implying that they would be fine, living with another nation or family, as long as they were given the land beside the waters. This distinction is important, as the lands of Tarshish were often mentioned in conjunction with the land of Ophir, the legendary land of gold. Reference to the lands of Tarshish and Ophir appear to have been interchangeable. The Book of Kings tells of a joint venture between King Solomon of Israel and Phoenician King Hiram to get gold from Ophir. 2nd Chronicles records Tarshish as the name of the lands from which they had obtained the gold. Ophir was a descendant of Noah's son, Shem. Traditions hold that Shem received the lands of Asia, to the south of Japheth, east of the Red Sea. Ophir fathered the nation whose settlement extended from Mesha as you go towards Sephar, the hill country of the east. Thus it would seem that Ophir received the southern mountainous lands to the far east of Asia. The Philippine dispersion myth informed the Austronesian-speaking peoples who chose to live on the islands and coastal areas of the nations that they would be sharing their house with the non-Austronesian indigenous peoples who chose to live on the forested mountains. Such was the case on the Philippine Islands, where we find 2 distinct people groups: the original indigenous tribal mountain people that spoke a non-Austronesian language arrived first. The Austronesian-speaking peoples who resided along the rivers and coastlands arrived a little later, migrating from the north. Children of Tarshish took longer because they first needed to travel by land to the eastern tip of China. Afterwards, the Austronesian-speaking people would need to prepare for their voyage. They had to cultivate sufficient grain to last them for at least a year as they settled into the new lands. They needed to scout the lands and prepare for what the people would require. They needed to develop and build the ships that would safely carry their families and all their supplies and tools needed. Austronesians made innovations like multi-hulls, outriggers, crab claw sails, and tanja sails, technologies that enabled the rapid spread of Austronesians into the islands of both the Indian and Pacific Oceans, known as the Austronesian expansion. Like birds flying across the oceans, Austronesian maritime vessels flew over the waters, carried along by the wind in their sails, in obedience to God's directive to spread out over the earth.